All right, hey, we are going to jump into things because similar to last week, my hope is to give you a little bit more time in small group. And we have a long story to get through today as we talk about this story that happens in Genesis 25 with Jacob and Esau. But before we get there, we need to set the stage again for what we're going to talk about and where we're going to go. And so we started a little mini-series in between. What do you got, Sophia? Oh, man. All right, you guys got to be nice to each other up here, or else it's just going to be too distracting. All right. So we started a mini-series in between our big series that we've been going through in the letter of, anybody remember what letter we've been going through? John first. First John. Yeah, close enough. We've been going through First John, but we're taking a little bit of a break, and we're going to jump into something else a little bit different. And so last week we started this new series called Original Design, and part of what we want to talk about and kind of work through here together is something that we're passionate about here at Pathway, particularly in Pathway students, and really what we want to do is to really redeem the conversation around sex and sexuality and gender and all these different things. And so we want this to be a place where we can actually talk about these things, because did you know this was God's idea? This is God's creation. He did it intentionally. This wasn't an accident. This isn't a part of the fall, the way that he created and designed us. And so we very much want to intentionally get into some of these conversations and this topic of how God has designed our bodies, how God has created us uniquely, and some of that stuff. And so, again, if you remember, this is kind of under the umbrella of what we call sexual integrity. And the idea of integrity is this idea of wholeness or completeness. And so when we talk about integrity, that's really what we mean, is becoming whole, like completely as we were created and designed. We could say it in this way as well. The idea of integrity is to be full or whole or fully unified as a person in mind, body, and spirit. This is what it is to have strong character, to be a person of integrity, is that you are fully unified as a person in your mind, in your heart, in your soul, in your strength, in all these areas. You are complete and whole. What we talked about last week is this reality that God created our bodies as sexual individuals exclusively as male and female. This is something he intentionally did. He created two genders, male and female, and he blessed these two genders to come together and to procreate and to be fruitful and multiply. And he created and designed our bodies in specific ways that just naturally fit together as male and female. And since God created our bodies, as he created us male and female, we also looked at this reality that as the creator, he is the one who exclusively has the final say. He's the one who gets to tell us what to do with our bodies. We don't get to say, well, I feel this way, or I want to do this, or I want to act out in this way. That's actually not how it works in God's kingdom. He is the ruler. He is the creator. He is the designer. And so every desire and feeling and thoughts that we may have, we need to bring it to him and surrender it and say, okay, this is a desire or a feeling or a want that I have. How does this connect with your kingdom? How does this, is this in conflict with your kingdom, or is it does it follow your kingdom with faithfulness and integrity? And so our goal is to really help build this foundational truth that we understand these things. So the first blank in your notes is this foundational truth that we want to keep coming back to, and this reality that God, again, is our creator and designer, and his original design determines the proper use of our bodies, our relationships, and our lives. Again, God is the creator and designer of us, and his original design determines the proper use of all these things. His original design determines the proper use of marriage, the proper use of relationships, the proper use of friendships, the proper use of our words, the proper use of the way that we live our lives, the proper use of our bodies, right? So this is important. This is something we looked at again last week, but bringing it back again to this foundational truth that we see in Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 27. So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them. Male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful and increase in number. Fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky and over every living creature that moves on the ground. So this is God's original design. Male and female coming together, being fruitful and multiplying. You can't, as human beings, be fruitful and multiply without there being sexual intercourse, right? That's just naturally what happens. That's a result of and an intended design behind sexual intercourse is producing children, being fruitful in the womb and multiplying children in that way. And so as we see that's God's original design, today we're going to look at kind of this design that goes up against the distortion of that design. So last week we also looked at Genesis chapter 3 and how sin entered the world, and there was shame that entered the world because at the end of Genesis 2, Adam and Eve were naked and unashamed. And there was no shame at all in their nakedness. And then sin entered the world, and as soon as sin entered the world, Adam knew he was naked and he hid himself from the Lord. And so there's this change that has happened. And so this is the world that we live in where God's design has been distorted by sin. The next two blanks here on your notes are going to say this. Evil is the intentional distorting of what was originally designed as good. Again, evil is the intentional distorting of what was originally designed as good. And this is part of why we want to redeem these conversations because, all of us kind of feel uncomfortable at times as we're talking about this topic in church. But again, this was God's idea. This was his design. This is not something that we should be ashamed of, something we should shy away from, because we also live in a world that is constantly throwing sexual things at us, right? Whether it's in music or movies or TV shows or just in conversations that you hear on the school bus or conversations you hear in class or things that people are talking, like it is just all over the place, right? And so because of that, we have to talk about it here. Because we need to understand, okay, this is what the world says. This is how the world speaks. This is what the world says is good and you should go after and it should be allowed to do this. But that's actually the distortion. And so we need to know, what does the Bible actually say about these things? So again, evil is the intentional distorting of what was originally designed as good. Because our enemy, Satan, delights in distorting what was good. He loves taking God's good creation and twisting it. And so what God did through Jesus is he redeemed what was originally designed as good. And so we see this word redemption is the untwisting and reclaiming of what God originally designed as good. That reclaiming is really a taking back what has been distorted and making it new again. And that's what Jesus does. He takes this conversation back. He takes this reality back. He takes who we are as human beings in a human body. He takes all of that back and he redeems it in such a way that it can once again be seen as good within the right boundaries and the way that God has designed it. So, as we think about this redemption, but we also think about this evil, this is kind of where our conversation of temptation comes in. And someone asked the question last week, what is temptation? And we see it right here in this difference between evil and redemption and happening right in this moment, that temptation is really a desire to do a certain thing, and it's usually a desire to do the thing that is distorted, right? Temptation is usually not like, we're usually not tempted to eat healthy food, right? Usually we're tempted by the donut or the cookie or the chocolate or whatever it might be. Like we're tempted to eat the thing that isn't good for us. We're usually tempted by something that is a distortion of what was good. Now we can be tempted to what is good. That wouldn't be sin, but it would be tempted to do what is right. And hopefully we would say yes to that. But a temptation is really a desire to do something that goes against what God says is good and right. So, transitioning into, I'm going to share a quote with you, and this quote comes from a Bible scholar named Christopher Ash, and he says, our society, which is like the world around us, the culture around us, shapes our beliefs as to what behaviors are normal, acceptable, and tolerable, right? Again, our society shapes our beliefs as to what behaviors are normal, acceptable, and tolerable. Another way to say this is that you are influenced by the things around you, and if you're influenced in a particular way, then those things become normal, right? My first job out of college was in a psychiatric center. It was a residential facility for teenagers, and my goodness, the creative ways that these people in this place were able to just string together cuss words and insults in just a very impressively creative ways. And every single day, right? It's like it became something that I was no longer, like, my ears didn't burn anymore. It was just like it was just par for the course. It was going to happen every day, and you kind of get used to that kind of language. You kind of get used to those sorts of things, right? I was becoming desensitized to language and insults and those things that were coming out of these people, because it's just like, hey, that's how they're going to talk, and like that's just, where they're at right now. And you just kind of move past it and just kind of ignore it, and it's like, whatever. And so you become desensitized by the things that you hear over and over, right? So if you watch a lot of, violent movies and play a lot of violent video games and things like that, you're probably desensitized to violence. And it doesn't impact you as much anymore because you have seen so much of it. Does that make sense? So again, the things that you are influenced by are going to change how you understand what is normal and acceptable and tolerable. And so that can be a dangerous thing because we are influenced in a lot of different ways. So my question for you is, what are some things you see around you that shape what you believe, that is normal, tolerable, acceptable? Like, what do you see, some things around you that try to shape what you believe? Yeah. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So just the sheer amount of people around you that are talking about a certain topic, right? So sexual identity and kind of having some questions or some doubts or saying certain things, you can become desensitized to it, but it can also shape what you believe about it because you know the person attached to it, right? It's no longer like this thing over there. It's now like personal. You know this person that's talking about it, right? Yeah, what else? Some things that shape your beliefs. Yeah, Ace. Oh, absolutely. Not even maybe, like 100% yes, right? The internet. What else? Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Your news sources. Yeah, like what channel you listen to, right? Absolutely. Yeah, what else? Your friends, for sure, right? You become like the people that you hang out most with, right? Yeah, did you have another one? No? Okay. Anybody else? I haven't heard like social media yet, right? Does anybody have a social media account? Yeah, I know some of you do, right? And that can influence what you believe, what you understand is right or good or acceptable, right? And so we need to be careful because what we listen to, it impacts what we believe. And so if we're spending more time learning from things outside of the Word of God, then we're going to be shaped mostly by something other than the Word of God, other than a biblical worldview. And so we need to be careful because the world around us really takes and promotes the thing that's popular in that moment. Right? Now, when something else becomes popular, then they stop talking about whatever was popular and they transition and move over to this other popular thing and kind of leave that whole other topic behind. And we see it happening in front of us. We see these things going on. And so our world just kind of takes what's popular for the moment and that defines and determines what they view as acceptable or good. And so as we begin to think about that, then it begins to shape this reality that you can kind of do whatever you feel like doing whenever you feel like doing it. And we could say it in this way. When everyone does what is right in their own eyes, it leads to chaos, anarchy, and destruction. When everyone does what is right in their own eyes. Can you imagine, Eli, where are you at, Eli? This is the game we should have played. We don't tell anybody any rules. We just put a ball out and say, make up your own rules. And everybody has their own rules, and it would be sheer chaos, right? Guarantee Xander's going to end up on the ground, right? Somebody's going to end up with some kind of rug burn. Something's going to happen. Somebody's going to get hurt. Somebody's going to break a chair. Somebody's going to break a TV. Something's going to happen because it's just going to be absolute chaos because no one has the same rules. right? And so that's what it looks like sometimes in the world that we live in, where there's this mentality of like, you do what is right in your own eyes, and if it doesn't hurt anybody else in some definition of hurting someone else that we're not really sure of what that might mean, because one thing might hurt somebody that doesn't hurt somebody, so it gets really confusing. If we do that, it's just chaos. It does not work in the way that our world wants it to work. And it actually brings to mind this passage in the book of Judges, in Judges chapter 21. The page number is not right on there, by the way. It's from Genesis. But Judges 21:25 said, "In those days there was no king in Israel. Everyone did what was right in his own eyes." And what this is saying, it's in the book of Judges. And if you know anything about the Old Testament, what happens in the book of Judges? Does anybody know what was going on in the book of Judges? There was this continual pattern of Israel would do whatever they wanted. A new kingdom would come in and take them over and would conquer them, and they would become enslaved. And then they would be like, oh yeah, we used to follow this guy, his name was God, and we used to follow him, and when we followed him, things went well, and when we decided to rebel against him, things didn't go so well anymore. And so they would cry out to God, hey, God, help us, and God would send somebody, a judge, to come in and redeem them and rescue them from the slavery that they were in. And then when that judge died, then Israel did the same thing again. And it happened over and 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 over again, because they did whatever they wanted to until they got caught, until they got in trouble. And then they're like, oh, God, help us. But they didn't really mean it, right? They didn't really have this genuine repentance and turning back to him. And so they just did what was right in their own eyes, and it created chaos. So whatever they desired, they did. And what we desire actually drives what we do. This is the next blank in your notes. Our desires motivate our actions. Our desires motivate our actions. Now, what do you think this means? Our desires motivate our actions. Ace? Yeah, the things that you want to do impact how you act, right? Absolutely, yeah. Oh, yeah. Absolutely. So you want to do something, somebody says you got to do these things first. You're like, okay, I'm going to do those things to get what I want. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. That's good. Yeah, that's a great understanding of temptation. Yeah, that's good. All right, so our desires motivate our actions. They drive what we do. And so we need to check ourselves and be like, okay, what do I desire, right? We look at what we do, and then we can kind of trace back and be like, okay, why did I do that thing? Right? It could be about a sin, right? Saying yes to a temptation to sin. And we look back and be like, okay, what did I really want out of that? What was I hoping to accomplish? Sometimes we sin because really what we desire is something good. We want to feel like we belong. We want to feel loved. We want to feel desired. We want to feel accepted. We want to feel that sort of way. And that's not a bad thing, but we can take a good thing and act it out in a bad way. And so we need to be careful about what we desire and then what actions that is leading us to, because though our desires motivate our actions, our desires are not always trustworthy. We can't always trust the thing that we desire, because we don't always desire something that is good. And there's a little note under that point in your notes page that is some of your blanks. Our desires are not always trustworthy. And then it says right under there, it says, just because you have a desire does not mean that desire is holy or good or righteous. So again, we need to remember that we live in a world that tells us do whatever you want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone else. But the Bible actually tells us that, hey, you cannot do whatever you want. You cannot go after every feeling that you feel and thought that you have, because it's not always true, because we live in a fallen world, in a world that is distorted. So just because you have a desire does not mean that desire is holy or good or righteous. So now we're going to go to the book of Genesis. Genesis chapter 25. So if you have your Bible, you can open up. I don't know what page it's on, but it's got to be probably like page 10 or 15 or somewhere around there because it's the first book of the Bible, and we're going to the 25th chapter of the first book of the Bible. So Genesis chapter 25. When you get there, let me know that you're there. Or let me know what page it's on. 16. Oh, so close. Page 16. All right, we're going to start in verse 19, so it might be on page 17. But chapter 25 and verse 19, and there's this story of Jacob and Esau, and we're going to read through it somewhat quickly, but here we go. Genesis chapter 25. This is the account of the family line of Abraham's son Isaac. Abraham became the father of Isaac, and Isaac was 40 years old when he married Rebekah, the daughter of Bethuel, the Aramean from Padan Aram, and sister of Laban the Aramean. So basically, he's just saying Isaac married Rebekah. All right. Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. And the Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. Now, this is important to note because back in those days, if you could not have children, it was actually a marker of shame and condemnation for that woman. And there was this word given to it that is barren. And that means you have an empty womb, like you cannot get pregnant for whatever reason it may have been. And that was not a positive thing. And so there's this, this pain and this stuff happening because we live in a broken world. Like, this is not God's original design that a man and wife would have sex and not be able to have a child. Like, that's not his original design. And so we could say it this way: the distortion is barrenness, but the design is to be fruitful and multiply. Right? God's intention for humanity is to be fruitful and multiply, to get married and to have children and to populate the earth and to subdue the earth, to be fruitful and multiply. And so what did Isaac do? Isaac prayed to the Lord on behalf of his wife because she was childless. So he prayed, and the Lord answered his prayer, and his wife Rebekah became pregnant. Right now, this is not just miraculous in that he opened her womb. This isn't like a Jesus sort of thing where like she just somehow was impregnated because of the prayer. Like, no, Isaac and Rebekah, then after Isaac prays, they actually consummate their marriage or reconsummate their marriage and have sex, and a child is produced out of this, right? So they prayed and they took action, and she becomes pregnant. And Genesis 25 says this: the babies jostled each other within her, and she said, "Why is this happening to me?" So she went to inquire of the Lord. And the Lord said to her, "Two nations are in your womb." She's having twins. "And two peoples from within you will be separated. One people will be stronger than the other, and the older will serve the younger." All right? So Molly and Kate, which of you was born first? So what it's saying is that actually Molly's going to, you're going to serve Molly, right? So it doesn't matter who was born first. The older is going to serve the younger. Or sorry, you're better? I don't know. I'm not going to get into that. But it's just saying that the older is going to serve the younger. Now, would you like that? No, right? You're like, no, I'm older. Like, how many minutes? Okay, but you're like, yeah, like obviously I'm older, like I came out first. So in this case, they're going to be born, and it's really kind of a crazy circumstance of how they're born. But basically, the older is going to serve the younger, and that really reverses how things were structured and meant to go. But then it continues. When the time came for her to give birth, there were twin boys in her womb, and the first to come out was red, and his whole body was like a hairy garment, right? So he's just born with a lot of hair. So they named him Esau. And after this, his brother came out with his hand holding onto Esau's heel. This is like they're born like same time. Like he's grabbing onto Esau's heel. So he was named Jacob, which means heel grabber. And Isaac was 60 years old when Rebekah gave birth to these twin boys. And so the boys grew up, and Esau became a skillful hunter, a man of the open country, while Jacob was content to stay at home among the tents. Isaac, who had a taste for wild game, loved Esau, but Rebekah loved Jacob. All right, so they're twins, but they're different. Tell me some of these differences between Jacob and Esau. What do you notice? Yeah, one's outdoor, one's indoor. Who are my outdoor people? Like, would much prefer to be outside. Okay, indoor people? Yeah, okay, all right. What else do we notice about differences between Jacob and Esau? Oh, boy. Yes, it's true. How many of you are your parents' favorite? I'm just kidding. You don't have to answer that. Oh, yeah. Oh, but that's spicy. All right. Anything else that you notice between Jacob and Esau? What else do we notice? One is hairy. My goodness. Like, they just are very clear, like, he has a lot of hair, okay? The other one was fair-skinned. He didn't have as much hair. Yeah, what else? Yeah, so they both mean different things. Esau's name means red, like literally just like he was red. They came out, they named him according to how he was born. And Jacob was born grabbing in the heel, so he's heel grabber. So it's kind of fun. All right, so this brings into our conversation this idea of stereotypes. Okay, this idea of stereotypes. Anybody know what a stereotype is? Ella? Okay, what else? Yeah. Whoa, that's intense. Sorry, Brooklyn. Yeah, all right. Or like all redheads are leprechauns or something. Yeah, right. Okay, just kidding. A stereotype, by definition, is something generally true about a group of people. Okay, something generally true. Doesn't mean it's always true, but there are characteristics. So stereotypes actually don't have to be bad things, but they can sometimes just highlight certain characteristics of people. And so when we get into gender stereotypes, this is the idea of something generally true about being male or female. And so this is where we can sometimes get into trouble, right? This is sometimes where we get into these conversations in some of the transgender conversation and things of that nature, and gender dysphoria and kind of wondering about sexual identity and some of those things. A lot of times it comes back to gender stereotypes and a discomfort with a stereotype of that particular gender. And so I just want to say today, like, hey, gender stereotypes, they exist for a reason. I did not teach my daughters to like Barbies. I did not teach, my youngest Ellie is 2. I did not teach her to be kind and nurturing to baby dolls and to take care of them and to feed them bottles and things like that. Maybe her sisters did, but I certainly have not taught them any of those things. I've tried to teach them kick, throw, things like that, like things having to do with like, sports and things. I've tried to do those sorts of things, but they actually tend to go the other direction and don't so much care about sports and things of that nature, watching them or any, like I've tried. And they just don't really care. So there's like a stereotype there that's kind of, however that might work out. Like boys and girls are different, but just because there are some things generally true about a particular gender doesn't mean that if you don't fit into that stereotype, you are not that gender, okay? And so we need to be clear on that, because we can look at somebody like King David, right? King David killed lions and bears with his bare hands. Like he killed them, right? That's pretty strong, pretty impressive. He was a skilled warrior in battle. Obviously, we know what he did with a sling and a stone. He killed the Goliath. He killed the giant Goliath. He also wrote poetry. He also cried a lot. Right? He talks about how often he would cry. He would cry himself to sleep. Actually, he would be sleepless because of how much he was crying on his couch. Okay, so David was a man in touch with his emotions, and he also liked to play the harp. He liked to sing. He liked to compose songs. And so this is a complex individual that on one side would be like very masculine, and on the other side, according to a stereotype, would perhaps be very feminine. And yet he was both at the same time, because we are complex creatures, right? Like me, hey, I like to talk about my feelings. Got no problem with that. I also like to shoot guns. I like to hit stuff. I like to play football. I like to play soccer. I like to run. I like to work out. I like to crochet. I like to dance to princess songs with my daughters. I like to dance with them. I like to, do all these sorts of things. I'll wear pink. I don't care. Like all those things, like people are complex. You don't have to fit into one stereotype and be one kind of way, because there's a broad spectrum of what it means to be this. And what it means to be this is that you were born as a male or born as a female, and that's God's design and intent for you as a human being to live into that reality and that truth of how he has created and designed you. So we have this story again, back to Jacob and Esau. Once, when Jacob was cooking some stew, right? Because Jacob was among the tents. He liked to be kind of more indoorsy. He's a little bit more of a cook sort of thing. And Esau came in from the field, and he was exhausted. He was a hunter, and he had been unsuccessful. He had not caught any game, and he is starving. So Esau says to Jacob, hey, let me eat some of that red stew, for I am exhausted. All right, so he comes in, he's so tired. He's like, hey, I need some of that stew. Give me some of that stew, or else I am going to die. Now, if you're the brother, would you give him the stew? Right? Your brother comes in, he's like so hungry. He's like, oh yeah, man, just have some stew. You're like, no big deal, right? How many of you would give him the stew? Okay, how many of you would not give him the stew? Harsh. Oh my goodness, dude. This is intense. All right. So this is what Jacob did. All of you who raised your hand for the second one, you are Jacob. And Jacob replied, first, sell me your birthright. The birthright was of the firstborn, right? And so now this is how the younger is going to supplant the older, and he's going to take that birthright. And Esau is like so hungry, and he's just like so bent on getting food in that moment that he says this, look, I'm about to die. Esau said, what good is this birthright to me? But Jacob said, hey, swear it to me first. So he swore an oath to him, selling his birthright to Jacob. Then Jacob gave Esau some bread and some lentil stew. He ate and drank and then got up and left. So Esau is driven by his desire for food, which we understand, right? Oftentimes we are driven by our desire for food. It drives us to do certain things, right? We need to eat, right? Fasting is like one of the worst things, but it's so good for you. But it's hard to do. So Esau is so hungry in that moment that he makes a decision in that moment that is going to have ramifications all throughout the entire rest of the Bible. Like, we are in the first book of the Bible. There are 65 more books to go, and the decision he made in Genesis 25 is going to carry through for the rest of the scriptures. For all the rest of the books that are to come, this decision impacted. In fact, in Matthew chapter 1, we see the genealogy of Jesus Christ, like this whole family tree of Jesus. And going back in the family tree of Jesus, do you know who's not in it? Esau. And why is Esau not in it? Because of this decision he made in a moment when he was hungry. And that is a big deal. And so we could say it this way: decisions you make in the moment matter and impact your life far beyond that moment that you're in. Sometimes these can feel like throwaway moments, these little decisions that we make in the heat of a moment, something that we say to somebody because we're just caught up in the heat of the moment, right? Have any of you ever said something that you're like, as soon as it left your mouth, you knew you should not have said it, and yet you just like you can't get it back, right? How many of you have ever done that before, right? I've done it too. And that's the decision that you make in a moment. But sometimes that thing that you say because you can't take it back, that thing you said in the moment might actually lose you a friend. Or that thing that you said, maybe you said it in response to a parent or somebody in authority over you, and it got you in some pretty big trouble because you can't take back what you let out, right? You can't take a decision back. Now, God can redeem that decision, and he can work good out of it, but you can't pretend like it didn't happen. You can't take that away, but God can redeem that thing. And so decisions that we make in the moment matter and impact your life far beyond that moment. And the reason this is important is because as we talk about this conversation under sexual integrity, the reality is that sometimes we get caught up into a moment that seems to be just quickly running away from us, quickly spiraling out of control. And the way that we need to handle that, when temptation comes, the best thing that you can do is just pause for a second. Just like actually physically stop whatever you're doing, your body, your mind, close your eyes, like clench your hands or whatever you might need to do. Stand up if you're seated or sit down if you're standing or whatever you need, like change whatever you're doing in that moment and pause and think about it. Because what happens right in front of us often feels like the most important thing. What is right in front of us, like the circumstance that we're in, it feels like the most important thing because we're here and we're in this moment. And we don't often think long term. We don't often think about in the future, how is this decision right now going to impact what happens to me in the future? And so we're going to say it this way, the last blank there in your notes. The reality is that now yells loudest. Right? It's like right in your face. It's all up in your grill. It's like right there. And now making a decision right now in the moment feels like it's the loudest, biggest thing going on right now. And it just yells really loudly, right? Right now just feels like it's this. And then the far distant future feels a lot more like this because you're not so much concerned about what's happening in the future when something's in front of your face like this, right? It's just like there's that difference there of like, now yells loudest, but later lasts longest. Making a decision, being able to pause and to slow down and to think about, okay, if I did this, would I still be okay with this decision tomorrow? If my mom knew about this, would she be okay with that? Right? If somebody were to walk in right in this moment when I'm making this decision, would I be okay with that? Right? If somebody were overhearing the way that I'm speaking, would I be okay with that? If somebody were reading the messages that I'm sending, would I be okay with that? If my youth pastor was hearing this or seeing this, would he be okay with that? Right? That's really weird. Right? But hey, you can start thinking that way. Like, hey, would Ben be okay with this? Like, if Ben were sitting right next to me right now, would I be doing the same thing? Right? Because I can guarantee you sometimes the answer is probably no. Right? And it would just be like, if you just thought about me sitting next to you while that was happening, it'd be pretty uncomfortable sometimes. Be like, well, I'm not going to send that message. I'm not going to do that thing. I'm not going to say whatever it is. When we stop and think, or even when we stop and say out loud what we desire or what we want or what we're thinking, sometimes just hearing ourselves say it, we'd be like, oh, that doesn't sound like a good idea. Or we go to somebody else, we go to a friend, and we're like, hey, I was thinking about doing this or thinking about saying this or whatever it is, and ask them, like, is that a good idea? Chances are your friend's probably going to be like, I'm not so sure about that one. And then you have to take your friend seriously and actually follow their wisdom in that moment, because now yells loudest, but later lasts longest. And so we want to make that decision to actually think about our future, to actually be concerned about who we are becoming, to think about the kind of people that we want to be. So now yells loudest, but later lasts longest. And when we go to small group here in a minute, one of the questions is going to ask you kind of some of that reality of like, hey, what do you desire for your life? And not just like, I desire to be famous, or I desire to go to college, or I desire to do whatever, but also what are some of the spiritual desires that you have for yourself, of like, what are things that you want to be true of you as a man or as a woman, as you're growing up in this world? Who do you want to become? Like, what spiritual goals do you have? And if you've never thought about that, this is a great time to start making a plan. Like, well, if you want to become mature, if you want to become a person of integrity, if you want to become a faithful follower of Jesus, like each day of your life, how can you get there? You build a plan. You start to think through, how can I actually attain this goal? It doesn't just happen. You have to be intentional about it. So we're going to pray, and then we'll send you off into small groups. Heavenly Father, we thank you for these moments here together. We thank you for your scriptures. Thank you that it provides a foundation for us to live our lives out of. And God, I pray that in any moment of our lives where we are wanting to do something, we're desiring to do something that goes against your word, Lord, that we would stop in that moment, release it, and turn to you. Surrender every area of our life to you, that we might walk in truth, we might walk faithfully according to your scriptures, and walk in relationship with you, Jesus. We pray these things in your name. Amen.